Hello, welcome back to Kim Reads as we continue straight on till morning. The Ride in the Rain. The beautiful little boat began its journey slowly, bumping along the bank until Wendy managed to push them away from shore. The steering pole had a well-hewn and polished handle that fit in her hands perfectly. She couldn't have imagined a better designed piece of equipment, which was intellectually amusing since some part of her mind must have imagined or designed it. Of course, she hadn't really visualized every detail of the entire boat. She just said boat, royal boat, and figured there would be gold and blue and fancy things on its comfy seat. And regal-looking equipment like this pole, but not specifically the pole she was holding, which is inevitably led to the question, who or what did provide the details? When she invented the story, who filled in the missing bits? Was just how the magic of Neverland worked? But this was a deep thought for another time. She had to work the pole around and around with all her strength before finally getting in the middle of newly invigorating river. The little boat bobbed in place for a minute as if discussing matters with waters around it, spinning a little as if found a good place to join, and then it took off. Wendy squealed with delight as they rushed along with the waves. Tinkerbell also squealed, but with terror, and held on the seat for dear life. Then she looked over at Wendy and saw her laughing, and the fairy reassessed the dangers. Very slowly she began to smile. Yeehaw! Wendy shouted as they rose up with the swell, and then crashed with a belly-flopping smash, spraying water with sky-bright rainbows. The droplets were small and cool and very refreshing. Her parched skin soaked them up gracefully. She licked her lips, cold, clear, and slightly mineral. Fish leapt in arcs before the bow of the seat, their scales glittering in the sunlight. The canyon walls raced by between her triumph at figuring how to escape the thirst and the speed of the river and the water in the day. Wendy was almost overcome with joy. I had no idea boating could be such fun, she cried to Tinkerbell. It's almost like flying. Tinkerbell gave a definition headshake to this. No, but Wendy just laughed. She did worry a little whether the whole plan would really work, as if it could get out of the demise of the first, or they would just ride the river forever. But then the landscape around them began to change slowly, perhaps indicating that they were getting back to Neverland proper. The thick red walls that rose into the sky on the left and right of them fell right away, too busy with the internal task of crumbling into piles of dust to bother with river banks any longer. And while there was still occasional tor or small rocky hill, the buttes and hoodoos and columns and pedestals and other exotic formations grew far less frequent. Just before these features disappeared entirely, two final ones appeared on opposite sides of the river. They were unbelievably massive, so tall that Wendy couldn't see her tops. Striped layers of red and white and black alternated with each other and into forever. She had the strange urge to salute as they passed between the two guardians. Both girls, fae and human, remained silent and still until the columns were far behind. Even the boat seemed slow for a bit. And after that, the land grew greener by stages. Tall, graceful, curving trees with branches like umbrellas marked the edge of the jungle. Canyons fall into the desert were recalled in living format here as massive gray trunks of trees, barriers of thick foliage, and unbelievable substantial skeins of vines. The calls of the monkeys or parrots or other Neverland creatures echoed hauntingly from the tops of emerald hillocks. Far in the distance they could once again just make out the toothy shapes of the Black Dragon Mountains. Wendy never imagined she could be so relieved to see jungle, or hills for that matter, even if they were covered in exotic plants. The desert had been fascinating, but she never wanted to be somewhere that flat again. It was so exposed that she had felt a speck peered at by God through an infinite microscope. Now she could relax and breathe again with leaves between her and sky. Where does the river lead? Tinkerbell asked curiously. Why, to the sea, of course, Wendy said with bravado. Things have worked out so far. Why shouldn't it continue to do exactly as she predicted? It feeds in the cove from the western side of the pernicious forest, skirting the quiescent jungle. Tinkerbell looked around thoughtfully. I wonder how all this new water will affect everything. What do you mean? When you fly, you're aware of these things. Air weight, rising, falling, moisture, winds. Remember you're tumbling back there over the ocean? Oh yes, Wendy said with a blush, but that was the ocean. This is just a river. I'm sure it will all work itself out. Tinkerbell pointed. Up ahead, things grew cloudy. Literally. As the two girls watched, the jungle began to disappear. Hills and vales faded, but not from supernatural causes. This wasn't the first playing tricks with geography. This was real mist and real fog. The world was blurred by something thicker than air, but thinner than real rain. The swirling madly as stray breezes gathered in considerable speed over the tops of trees, rushing toward the river. Clouds of all sorts were pulled from across the heavens into the maelstrom. Puffy white Neverland specials, thunderheads from the Black Dragon Mountains, mackerel backs and mare's tails from someplace inland that must have been a bit like England. My goodness, Wendy had never seen anything like it. Whatever was happening was fascinating and hypnotic, and deeply unnerving on a very basic level. She felt the touch of terror that all animals experience when they instinctively know something is wrong with the world around them, when the weather goes south. There was a giant crack. A moment later, Wendy realized it wasn't the sound of thunder. It was the sound of 1,000 gallons of water spilling out of the sky all at once. Giant hot raindrops hurt as they hit her head and eyes. The percussion of them pounding the river was deafening. We need to get to land, Wendy cried out, once again grabbing the pole and pushing. Tinkerbell nodded vigorously and started to fly up, but quickly realized there was nothing she could do. Each drop was the size of her head. Already her wings looked crushed at the tips. She hid under the bench. Wendy wrestled with the pole, dress and slip plastered against her body by the torrents of rain. Water streamed into her eyes, and whenever she tried to look up to see where they were going, eventually she surrendered to the greater power of nature and just pushed as hard as she could, blind, hoping it was toward the eastern shoreline. The wind worked the surface of the river into a rippling frenzy. The boat spun on its hull like a compass, twisting every direction. She finally felt the keel of the boat touch soft, sandy bottom. Wendy leapt out. The water was freezing. All thoughts of the desert washed away along with its red dust and sweat. She gritted her teeth and yanked on the boat, dragging it out of the river and far up the bank as she could manage. It wouldn't do to leave such a pretty, well-made thing to drift out in the ocean or smash itself to bits on its rocks. It might come useful later. Things had a way of doing that in adventure stories. Besides, it was the first boat Wendy had ever made. Tink, come with me. She held out her left hand. Without a single protest jingle, Tinkerbell zoomed like a well-trained bee out from under the bench and into her friend's palm. Closing her fingers gently over the fairy, Wendy put her head down and ran into the forest. The nose of the rain was considerably louder here. Giant drops hitting giant leaves of splats of reverberated like ancient drums. Just breathing was tricky in the constant deluge. Wendy came close to choking several times as she took gasps of rain along with the air. Tinkerbell's globe peeped out of the cracks between Wendy's fingers. Finally, a truffle of tree, she whispered moistly, like that of the Lost Boys' hideout. They're hollow to their roots. Wendy looked for the best she could, since she didn't perfectly remember those trees, and botany was not her strong suit. There were no edges or shadows in the jungle, just a dark, twilighty gray that made shapes and distances difficult to judge. She stumbled to avoid the nearly invisible deep black pools that were home to the playful but spiny seven-legged carapace things that leapt and splashed in high arcs between them. The whole exercise was exhausting. Finally, Wendy saw a tree with comforting wide trunk and giant knobby roots. Although she had a fair idea this was their goal, it was confirmed by an intense jingling and shaking of her fairy holding hand. And there it was, at the base of her trunk, a triangular-shaped hole framed by several intersecting roots, just wide enough for Wendy to slip through. It was as if her breath had twisted herself around like a cord. Go take a look, she suggested, opening her hand. Tinkerbell obligingly buzzed down and down to the hole. Fairy glow flickered and bobbled like a hand in a lantern as she zipped around the tree. She reappeared at the entrance and nodded vigorously. Great, Wendy said ironically. A dry hole under a tree. Even more exciting than seeing a jungle again. What a day. Glad there was no one around to see, she awkwardly struck one foot in the hole. Dangling, it touched a hardest surface and then squeezed her other foot in next to it. Spinning slowly with her hands above her head, she ducked down until she disappeared, like a genie shrinking into her bottle. The little cave wasn't as half bad as she expected. It was dry, didn't smell too musty, and didn't contain any fetid animal refuse. If she could pull her knees up there was even room to sit or curl around herself and sleep if she needed to, rather than feeling claustrophobic because of the weight of the tree above them. Wendy felt safe under the roofs that laced together to make their ceiling. On the whole, a very acceptable hole, Wendy said approvingly. If I were a rabbit, I would very much like to live in a place like this, permanently. We're just here until the rain stops, and then we have to go find Peter. Tinkerbell jingled a little anxiously. And save the world, don't forget. We have no idea where the pirates are, or exactly what they intended to do, and the first said the time was running out. Wendy sighed and put her hand out without thinking to comfort the little fairy. Without thinking, the little fairy climbed up to it. I can't even tell how much time since we first entered the land of the first. Do you have any idea? Tinkerbell looked thoughtful, then shrugged and shook her head, jingling meaninglessly. I wonder if time passes differently here, like in the fairy tales. No disrespect, she added quickly. Was the time we spent there like centuries out there? As if we were asleep or under a fairy spell having the time of our lives. While time passed out here? No, that doesn't feel right. I think it's the reverse. And I think that's what makes Neverland sense. Really, time passing slower for the dwellers in the infinite beginnings of the world. Oh, I don't like the sound of that. Don't you? I just came up with it. Dwellers in the infinite beginnings of the world. I should write that down. She went to take out her journal before remembering that her parents still had it. Worse than that, she realized her bag was gone. When had she lost it? When the mermaids were trying to drown her? When she slept in the air on the way to the first? Clambering around the rocks in the desert? The river journey? She couldn't even remember the last time she had seen it. Well, I suppose the pirates' gold buttons and thimbles will not come useful later in the story, as originally suggested, she said sadly. Nothing in Neverland seems to stick around for very long. I must remember when packing for my next adventure to choose a bigger, sturdier satchel. A solid wax canvas one, maybe, that goes over my shoulder with tight straps, like a soldier's. Tinkerbell pouted sympathetically but distractedly, still watching the rain. Well, we'll fly as soon as it calms down a bit, Wendy promised. Glumly, she watched her friend's shadow squeeze droplet out of her wings, and the emptiness of the space on the wall Wendy's shadow should have been. She tried to think happier thoughts. I'm going to stop right there, and I will continue later.